Thank you so much, Mr. Adigar. I don't think the audience could have, I think they have gained enough and more. You have set the tone for today's session. They have got the background, how the Indian and the Swiss government are coming together, what are the goals in mind, and what is the ultimate objective. With that, I'm going to directly move to Andreas over here. Andreas has been involved with this project for a very long time. As I mentioned earlier, he has been on the board of the 2000 Watt site since 2008. So considering his role and involvement, the first question that I have for him today is, where do you see the urban development going in India? And why do you think in that situation, 2000 watt smart city is ideal or apt for the current Indian scenario?
Thank you very much, Payal. I will take over and run with the ball you threw. Very soon, 75% of all Indians will live in cities. The big metropoles are suffocating under commuter traffic, disjointed logistics for goods, deplorable sanitary systems, and mountains of waste. We all know that. All of our friends in India suffer from it. In the Green City Zurich project that you just saw before, we were able to develop the first carbon neutral township in Switzerland. It combines 2000 watt site, which is the most advanced sustainability level worldwide. It is the only label worldwide that looks at how much energy does a person use, not a building. Who cares about the buildings? If we have a growing population, we have a growing amount of energy needed. So we have to go according to person. The 2000 watt smart city principles are 6 of them: smart centrality, smart connectivity, smart tech centers, smart energy, smart food production, very, very important issue in India. And if all of those 5 are energy management, traffic management, and a community app where everybody who lives there can get information and speak to each other about important subjects. So, how do I see the future of urban development in India? If we do what the principles of 2000 watt smart cities require, then we have a chance. The smart grid connects central places of high density. People should live close together, as they do in India anyway, so you're a step ahead of Europe, where people don't live that closely together. These central places can be very small. That's why we're talking about townships, not about cities so much. Or they can be mid-size, and then we call them towns, or they can be large, and then we call them city. So a city well connected with the surrounding towns and townships, all built according to sustainable building standards, is what we call a 2000 watt smart city. I'll show you how this is built with the primary node, the good connections, the secondary node, the towns around the big city, and then the tertiary node, the small townships around the towns. And all together in the smart grid becomes the 2000 watt city. And keep in mind, we start with the building to be well insulated, to be well aired, naturally ventilated, whatever is possible in the climate. We put them together to townships, and several townships together form a town, and several towns the city. And in this grid, which we call 2000 watt smart city grid, we have a chance, and we can become sustainable in the near future. And more of the technology of that, I would like to hand over to the next speaker, to Jürgen Wollm. Professor Jürgen Wollm works with us on the 2000 watt smart cities in Switzerland.
Thank you, Andreas. I think we have understood the context and how it's going to be useful from the Indian perspective. But with that, as you rightly said, since we have an international urban expert with us today, it becomes even more relevant to understand why do we even need such kind of sustainable cities, and whether the COVID-19 situation will change the planning demands when it comes to such smart cities in India. Very warm welcome to you, Professor Wollm.
Hello, welcome, Payal. So getting back to your question with respect to whether we need smart, sustainable cities in India, we can expand this question to a global perspective, whether we need sustainable cities at all. So with respect to the developments regarding COVID-19 that we've all faced over the past weeks and months, unfortunately, has shown how vulnerable our world has become. So the globalization, as we all know, has led to strong interlinkage between the continents. However, this small virus showed that it did not respect our borders or any of these interlinkages. And so the more we are connected, the faster this dissemination happened. And on the other hand, we need this connectivity to share our resources in a smart way. And these are more or less the four big M, the manpower, money, materials, or also machinery, to seize these synergies between the different continents and between different people on this planet. However, with our responsibility for future generations, also the sustainable use of our natural resources, as we have heard, and also the protection of our environment, we need to apply smart solutions on the places we live. And that means to our townships and to the cities, as Andreas illustrated. These smart sustainable cities are a way for India to overcome these several future challenges we've heard. So 75% of Indians will live in cities, and we cannot escape globalization. However, we need to think about, in a way, deglobalization. Let me name it that way. What does this mean? We cannot step back and hide away in our silos and in isolation. However, we in the past weeks, and we identified this again, and this decreases also the level of vulnerability and increases the level of certainty for all of us. So therefore, consider, for instance, Switzerland. We do not have mega cities here in Switzerland, so the whole population is between 7 and 8 million. So this is more or less the size of a mega city. However, our largest city in Switzerland is 420,000 citizens. It's Zurich. And we have, on the other hand, a high level of diverse usages available in all these towns, townships, with a highly efficient infrastructure that enables us to share these resources efficiently. So with respect to the planning demands, we already heard a lot about the future development of residential, also the future development of our working environment. How will the office market develop over the next years? We will probably identify a trend towards decentralized solutions with a higher level of self-support. So therefore, the question is, how will our offices become places where we collaborate and communicate rather than work on desks? So we can work on the desks at home if we have enough space, and if our residential homes are built to enable us to work from home, or we go to co-working environments where we can really share the infrastructure with others. And the office, and this is also true for me as an employer, will only be the place where we collaborate and communicate and cooperate. So co-working will definitely increase, and also tremendous change in retail will happen. We've seen the increase in e-commerce and online trade, and so the question is, what will our shopping malls look like in the next years? And maybe it's more about user experience rather than going there and buying some items and issues.
Thank you, Professor Wong. I think we have set the stage that smart cities are here to stay. 2000-watt smart cities need to be established in our country, and though there's a long way to go, but I think this is the juncture where we need the Indian government supporting that as well. And with that, I would welcome Mr. Vikram Kumar, and thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. Considering Pune is one of the cities which has been chosen to have a smart city, especially a 2000-watt smart city, I wanted to know from you, what are PMRDA's plans when it comes to urban development, and why do you think Pune was specifically chosen to have a smart city?
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to start with see where India stands in terms of smart cities. See, India, a population of around 130 million, 45% of India living in urban areas, which is around 600 million people living in urban areas. The real efforts towards smart city in India start with the Prime Minister's mission on smart cities. when Prime Minister came forward and said, let's build 100 smart cities in the country. That's where the real focused effort towards smart cities started. Now, last few years, there have been massive spending by the state governments, by the federal governments, by the central governments on infrastructure, metros, roads, ports, lot of activity, lot of development happening by both the federal government and the central government, and huge spending happening on infrastructure. The idea is very simple. The idea is to improve the standards of living and trying to bring on board the best available practices which are available in the world, be it in terms of solid waste management, be in terms of the health management, be in terms of the public transport. The best available in the world should also come to India, should also be used by Indians. But the problem or the challenge which we are facing is that the smart city has to be designed in Indian milieu. What works for Zurich may not work for Pune. What works for Switzerland may not work for Maharashtra. Indian societal needs are very different, and we need to work in according to Indian needs. The design has to be as per the requirement of local society, local taste, and local flavors. For example, just to quote, Mumbai's population is 15 to 20 million people. If you look at MMR, it's 20 million people living in Mumbai itself. Huge population of our country is in need of apartments which are not very big in size. A lot of low cost housing, a lot of housing which requires probably very small footprints of apartment is required. And accordingly, the designers have to adjust to this population percentage, which requires very low cost housing, very low cost requirements they have. Since last 2 months, we have been facing this COVID pandemic, and I think the COVID pandemic has given the requisite nudge to development of smart cities. The nudge, the push has come from this COVID pandemic. We have felt the need to live in sustainable cities. We have felt the need to live in such cities which are fully taking care of our needs without going outside our city. Such cities are required. Such cities needs have been felt over last 2 months. Smart city needs to become more smarter. When I say smarter, I see it should not only cater to people who are working in IT sector or in financial sector or who work with IT or computers. We also need industrial smart cities. We also need cities in which there are industries, but there is a housing which is nearby. There is a place where people can work, which is not only IT. Somebody told me that there is not even a single automobile in the world in which there is nothing from Pune. Each and every automobile manufacturing in the world has something to do with Pune. Pune is a mix of population which is young, which is vibrant, which is working in IT sector, which is working in manufacturing sector, and Pune is expanding at a very, very fast rate. When we did a survey, we realized that around 80,000 apartments will be required every year in Pune for next 20 years. So much is the flow of people towards Pune. It is acting like a magnet for the hinterland. The hinterland of Maharashtra, people are moving towards Pune, and because there are jobs available, because there are opportunities available, people are shifting to Pune. And in PMRDA, we are working towards making this possible. We are working towards providing them transport solutions in terms of metro. We are developing metro Pune. We are also looking at developing the ring road in Pune, which will encircle the Pune city so that people can easily move around Pune. Then also we are looking at the water needs of Pune's population, where we are developing a lot of water schemes for the Pune city from nearby areas which are having plenty rainfall. So basically, the idea of PMRDA is to provide the requisite infrastructure, the infrastructure required for the cities to prosper, infrastructure required for people to come and live in Pune. For 2000 watt cities, we have already shortlisted few sites. Andreas and we are working together. In spite of this lockdown, we have been in constant touch. We have been doing our VCs, and we have shortlisted few sites. These sites, as Andreas thinks and as we think, are ideal site for these 2000 watt smart cities. These sites are near major industrial and IT hubs. These sites, once we are able to break ground, we'll see huge interest in terms of people's participation, in terms of people's demand. I'm pretty hopeful that as soon as the lockdown ends, we'll be able to secure the land and work towards this development of these cities. Overall, Pune as the whole is facing a lot of in-migration. Pune as a whole is a preferred choice for many industries. Post this pandemic, we feel many more industries will come to India, many more manufacturing opportunities will come to India, and amongst those coming to India, a maximum part will come to because it already has an ecosystem, it already has a very strong base, and we are ready for such exciting times in future. Thank you, Payal.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kumar. I think the tone is set that we have the technology coming in from Switzerland. We have the requisite infrastructure which is being provided by the Indian government and the necessary support, and the fact that both parties recognize the need for having smart cities in India. With that, I would like to slightly digress because we now know about the technology, we know about the governmental support, but there is a very important component which is going to play a crucial role when it comes to the smart cities being developed in India. With that, I will now request Ms. Montoya, who is there on the panel with us today, to share her thoughts.
The fact that smart cities is not just about efficient cities, it's about livable cities and sustainable cities. And this is the focus of many reinsurers like Swiss Re, who need to think of development in the long term. So for companies like Swiss Re, the impact of our investments and the risks that we take can have a big impact on developed and developing economies looking to do better in terms of building resilient economies and societies. So that's very much the focus for Swiss Re. And I can see we're a little bit short of time, so I'm going to go quickly. We all know why we're focusing on cities. Most of the world population will be living in cities or is already today, and that trend towards urbanization is only going to grow, with 60% of GDP coming in the world's largest cities and 60% of megacities being in Asia and many in India. So this is a very hot topic for India, and I know you have hundreds. Enhancing and investing in infrastructure is critical to enable growth. And that goes beyond construction and engineering. We also invest in things like energy, renewable energy production, transportation, marine, aviation, logistics, trade enablement. All of these are critical growth enablers for economies. And of course, as the urban population continues to grow, the building stock is expected to double by 2060. Now, this is the equivalent of building a new New York every month from now until then. So, and the energy consumption will double by 2040. The middle class will double from 1 billion to 2 billion in the next 10 years. These are very dramatic changes. And how do we do this sustainably? How do we make sure that we're meeting growing stakeholder expecting all the risks, which of course also connect physically because the space is dense? This creates a very big accumulation potential, which we can help solve. So we're working in public-private research partnerships in order to accelerate developments and understand risks better so as to predict and prevent them and manage them as best as possible. And of course, We also work hard on understanding and developing resilient solutions that will give a competitive advantage to cities and nations so that they can attract investments and businesses and citizens. So there's a challenge out there as to which city is smartest and is attracting the best companies, the coolest people. So this is very important because this also has a huge impact on the cost of borrowing capital and the availability of capital for investments, for example, into infrastructure. So if you go into the next slide, one of the areas that we focus very much on is, of course, event resilient infrastructure, because natural catastrophes are growing, and the what we call the protection gap is actually growing as well. And for example, in India, up to 66% of public sector extreme weather event losses recently have been related to infrastructure damage. So building resilient infrastructure in cities is critical in order for governments and economies not to keep being set back at each event, which one of those perils that just keeps hitting you. We like to call it a death by 1,000 cuts. It's where you keep hemorrhaging resources and losing economic value because of one loss after another. So it may not be as dramatic as one earthquake that just devastates your city, but you get 100 of them, and so you're constantly being lagging economically due to it. So understanding these risks, and then if you go to the next slide, building infrastructure that is future-proof and can accommodate for the changing environment is critical in order for governments and private companies to credibly and reliably invest in some of these big projects. And of course, one of the big risks that is arising and will, is already affecting India is higher temperatures. So heat waves in cities are having huge impacts. For example, also in construction, where projects have to stop because it's simply too hot. And so all of this is creating new risks that we need to better prepare for and manage. Now, if we go to the next slide, we can already see that there have been recent headlines showing the impact of climate change on Indian infrastructure. And I was very happy to read that in June 2016, India signed the Sendai Disaster Risk Reduction Framework with a clear commitment to build back better, right? So it's not just about rebuilding after a disaster. It's really about trying to build infrastructure that will withstand cyclones of the scale of Fani and Orissa. We go to the next slide. So what we are doing at Swiss Re, we have an initiative called Quantum Cities. And what we try to do is we try to understand risks and their interconnectivity. And we use technology in order to better model and quantify risks and then predict and prevent risks. And then what we do is, if you go to the next slide, we look at how this translates into solutions for the different parts that are critical to our economies, to our societies, and that are resilient with respect to the environment. If we go to the next slide, it's not all solved. So there are a number of research pillars within Quantum Cities that we're working on, because there are many different questions that we still need to solve. So, and we're not going to go from no technology to full technology. We're in a constant transition. And so that transition between a digital society where machine intelligence and humans work together also creates new risks. So for example, on the roads, when you have different levels of autonomous vehicles, and so you have people driving, deciding what the car is going to do against people driving where the car is deciding, and who's liable, and how do we make those algorithms work better. So these are the kind of areas that we're working on. Or for example, for supply chain, how can we use sensors and machine learning in order to better predict and prepare for risks, but also respond to risks. So for example, also in pandemics, once you have a pandemic, how can we better redirect resources? How can we better respond to these very highly connected and high impact risks? And so, of course, we're also doing that in the area of health, and the big topic for us remains climate change and natural catastrophes. So if we go to the next slide, what we're working on as a company is to really develop risk solutions to this. And really, we at Swiss Re measure the smartness of a city and its ability to deliver safe, healthy, sustainable lives and economies. And we use technology to better understand risks and behaviors, just to develop solutions that can support our company's purpose to make the world more resilient. So if you go to the last slide, we're working at the nexus of technology, economy, and societal changes that are creating new risks, but also bringing new opportunities. And we need to better understand those risks, and we need to work together in public, private, and often also research partnerships in order to bring the solutions to these large-scale transformational projects that support urban and national strategic visions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Manchoya.